pretty hands-off. I'm more just a shell that you can project your questions through if you really don't want to speak them out loud or put them in the chat. We've got a great group of panelists today, so let's start off with them all introducing themselves and perhaps the industry in which their internships were in.
Oh, I can go first. So my name is Nabir Sarma. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a junior. And last summer, I worked as not just an intern, but a co-op at Suez Water Technologies and Solutions. So they're a company that primarily makes like water filtration membranes. So I worked in a sort of manufacturing engineering role there.
All right, I can go next. My name is Tejas Devakti. I'm also a junior in chemical engineering. And yeah, I had a previous internship this last summer with HB Fuller, and so they make all kinds of adhesives. I was specifically in like the construction products division, so I was also working in a similar like process engineering, manufacturing support kind of role as an intern there. And right now I'm also doing a co-op with Colder Products Company in Roseville, and so they make like quick disconnect couplings essentially for fluid handling.
I'll go next. My name is Brian Yee. I am also a junior in chemical engineering, and my freshman year, I interned at a company called Nordic Ware as a quality assurance intern. So they basically manufacture things like cookware and bakeware, so it's like making sure everything there is actually being made correctly, and like making sure that whenever like some customer wants some new specification, making sure that's actually being changed and stuff like blueprints and things are being met. And then this past summer and currently I'm still working as an intern at Lube Tech. They are based in Golden Valley and they basically make things like vehicle lubricants and fuels and stuff. And I'm working now as a compliance intern, which I'm slowly making it up the ranks in higher order because now I make sure that everything fits into national and international regulations. And it's been a wild ride.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm a senior at the U this year. And after my sophomore year, my internship was as a quality assurance intern at Chocolate Shop Ice Cream Company out of Madison, Wisconsin. We also manufactured Izzy's ice cream, which people might be more familiar with here. And yeah, I was just doing like quality checks then. And then after my junior year, I was an analytical technologies and technical sales intern at Donaldson Company. They do filtration products. And then, yeah, as an analyst, everything got moved virtually. So I like ended up doing more of like a coding based project and like automated a image analysis process for my analytical technologies portion. And then I was just introducing customers to a new product at the end of the summer with the technical sales internship.
All right, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie. I am a senior in chemical engineering, and I've done 2 internships with ExxonMobil down in Houston, Texas. The first was in capital projects, and so I did a gas plant design and optimization for one of their mega projects that was overseas. And so I did all sorts of project management related work, including kind of front end, back end design. And then my second internship was this past summer with COVID, which was primarily virtual. And it was actually on the organizational change and change management side. So for those interested in consulting and in business, that's the side that I worked in. Primarily with digital implementation and basically how do we run the organization better in the unprecedented times of COVID. So happy to answer any questions.
Also, just going to jump in here. If no one saves these poor panelists with questions, I will grill them. So please be merciful and ask questions. Otherwise, I can get the ball rolling. For all of you, what do you think helped in getting your first internship? Or like what on your resume do you think helped make you stand out from the rest of the people applying?
One thing that I've been asked about in pretty much every interview that I've done for internships is my experience on the Chemi car team. So if you don't know what Chemi car is, it's a subcommittee of our AIChE student chapter where we basically build a small scale car and design the chemical reaction that powers it, which is really cool. And having it on my resume is a really neat thing to talk about with interviewers because it shows that you have done something hands-on with your chemical engineering knowledge. So that's something, I think our Chemi car team is filled up this year, but maybe next year, if you want to be part of that, it's a great resume builder.
I guess we're going in order. I would say that one of the things I've been asked about in every single interview I've had is marching band. Now, I know that doesn't apply to like a lot of you, but I would definitely say in general, getting involved in something outside of just your core classes is like almost necessary at this point, because it kind of shows interviewers that you have some kind of initiative, you're doing something a little extra that you don't necessarily have to do. And especially if it doesn't have to be engineering related, like mine's marching band. Yours can be anything that you're personally interested in. Just something to show that you've done something outside of class, essentially, because they all know you have the knowledge from class.
Yeah, so for me, I feel like the biggest thing too is just like extracurriculars. Like freshman year, I was part of like the freshman year initiative for SESB and stuff. But I feel like the big thing too is, especially if you're like a freshman or a sophomore trying to get an internship, like the biggest reason why extracurriculars help is because it just kind of gives you a talking point to talk about who you are as a person and not necessarily as like an engineer or an employee. Because like, sure, you might have taken like a couple of intro courses, or like even now as like juniors or seniors, like we actually have coursework that we can be like, oh, I understand certain aspects of engineering. But in the end, they also know that you're a college kid, so that you're never going to enter their industry as an intern being like, oh, you can go do this project right away and I expect it to be done in like a month. Like they understand that there's going to be a learning process. So the most important thing that you can kind of convey to a recruiter or an interviewer is just like, hey, I'm a good person and I hope we can have like a good time in this conversation. And if you make them like you, it'll make them want to bump your name up to like, like the specific like hiring managers or like the specific, like recruiters who are actually looking for people in positions and aren't just like pooling together everyone.
I guess one thing I would say is to like make sure you're oh, I remember what I was actually gonna say. So it's, even if you haven't had relevant job experience, make sure you like pull specific skills across from like maybe your high school job experience if you had any, or like summer jobs. Because then if you show that you still gained valuable skills, even if it's not like super technical or formal, it still really helps. Like sophomore year, I was a barista at Caribou. And so I was like, that's really good time management, really good people skills. And to kind of connect those two bridges, even though my work experience wasn't relevant, I think really helped me to impress recruiters.
I mean, what I'm about to say is probably going to echo some of the things that some of the other panelists have said, but I'll try to keep them to a minimum. I mean, for me personally, I think I spoke to some of you on like the undergraduate research committee because I also spoke there. And that definitely helped land my first internship, is just demonstrating that you've been involved with engineering outside of class. And like Brian was saying, like, don't be an asshole. Like nobody wants to work with an asshole, like even like in their company, right? Like they're looking for a certain type of person, a certain culture. And so they're looking for a fit, right? So like they can train technical skills, but they can't train a personality. And so you want to like be happy, right? No one wants to be all like doom and gloom and like, oh, like this is gonna be 80-hour weeks or like whatever. Like no one's gonna tell you that. And so what you want to do is to really exude like you're eager to learn, and that you recognize that you might not have a lot of experience, and it's okay to say that. I did that in my first interviews. Is like I recognize that one of my weaknesses is that I don't have relevant experience, but I'm really eager to learn, and I think you can benefit from my enthusiasm, and that's a totally valid thing to say. And I would even recommend it. And honestly, like people say that GPA doesn't matter. GPA does matter. Especially the larger companies, they do screen for it. And so, pay attention in your classes, and because if anything else, it's going to get you through the door, and it's going to get you that chance to at least have FaceTime with a recruiter, and that's really when everything else begins to even matter, right? So don't slack off in your classwork. Especially a lot of like the bigger companies, they're willing to train you in what they need as long as you can have that FaceTime with them.
Can I ask some questions now?
Yeah, go ahead. Anyone can just ask questions and jump in when they want.
Okay, sweet. I have a question for Jesse. I'm wondering what your experience at ExxonMobil was like and what your role was you did there.
Yeah, so I did 2 summers with them. The first was summer 2019. So they have a pretty big internship program. They're one of the biggest hirers of chemies here, as well as basically anywhere else. I worked with people from the most obscure colleges that you can imagine, and also like the biggest names, right? Like I had friends from MIT, from Stanford. And honestly, like their internship program was super developed. Like they had seminars for us to go to. The culture was very like learning based, and they encouraged like us to go to continual like professional development events. In terms of my roles in particular, the first summer I was in capital projects. So I was given the responsibility of a gas plant that was going to be used for one of their overseas projects in like a third world country. And so my project was going to help deliver sustainable natural gas lines to the local population that didn't have energy infrastructure at the time. And so that was really cool responsibility, obviously, to give to the intern because nobody else was working on it. So it was just me. And like the scale is like incredible. Like that's the thing about oil and gas is like there's a lot of money flowing through it. And so like giving an intern like a couple $100 million worth of equipment to say like go do like that's a lot. But it was also a lot of fun, and I definitely think it influenced like what I want to do like post grad as well. I'm very interested in continuing with capital projects. And then I was looking at technology selection, that project as well. So looking at, if I use, this piece of technology versus this piece of technology, how much money would you be able to like save? And then my second summer was in, like I mentioned earlier, organizational change and change management. So they were introducing a new piece of technology, and I was kind of brought in to look at what's going well, what's not going well, how do we begin to assess success for the project, and how do we do it better? And then this piece of technology was on like the decision technology side of things. So how can we better support decision making when it comes to project investment? Does that kind of help?
Yeah, that does. Thank you for the explanation.
For those of you who are involved in both research as well as internships, what do you find rewarding over in internships that you don't find in your research areas?
Okay, I can go first on this. I definitely started like the grad school route, and then now I'm like I accepted a full-time offer in industry. And so I definitely found that I liked industry more. So I'm going to say that as a total disclaimer for everything else that's about to come out of my mouth. But I really like the pace of industry. So in academia, you kind of have like you take your time, you do fundamental research, and there's no sense of urgency on it. And like industry just tends to be very fast paced. Things are changing constantly with the business environment. You can be working on something, but then someone like your manager come in tomorrow and be like, benchmarking says that this piece of technology is no longer profitable, scrap it, start with something else. And so for me, that's really, really exciting to be able to have that constant kind of keep me on my toes kind of feeling. And for me, like being able to shift around a lot between location and roles is really important. And so ultimately, that's why I thought that industry was a better fit for me than research.
Are there any other of us panelists who do research currently?
I do not do research, but I can detail my thoughts after having many conversations with professors about why I ended up preferring industry now in my future pursuits of post-undergrad career. And I guess for me, like after talking with a lot of professors, is that it's comparative to what your life will be as like a chemical engineer or just in general in academia compared to industry is like, it's kind of like what Jesse was saying and how it's like, it is like a different level of pace in terms of just like what you're doing, right? It's not like you're going to be assigned one project and like say you go to grad school, right? And once you get assigned to your lab, it's you basically get assigned one project and you essentially work on your thesis for 4 or 5 years. And like that's your project. But when compared to industry, it's like you can just have a project for maybe like a month or 2 weeks. And it kind of details like a fundamental difference in what your work is doing compared to academia or industry, right? Because if you kind of look at it as like there's two circles of like knowledge, right? It's like if you're in academia, you're trying to expand this outer circle of knowledge, right? You're at like the boundary of what we consider to be possible or what we know. You're looking at things that like we don't know or we don't understand, and you're trying to bring them into the realm of things we know. But comparative, when you're working in industry, it's you're trying to grasp the knowledge we do have already, and you're trying to apply it to the next stage. And the kind of way I look at it is like, if you're in industry, the work you do is a lot more applicable to like taking the next step, while the work you do in academia, at least from what I've been hearing from professors, is more of just about like, what could all the possible next steps be in like 5 or 10 years? And I guess for me as a person, like a lot of my more motivations or interests lie in what are like the next sequential steps, or like what are the next innovations and like the next maybe like 2 or 3 years that'll occur that'll be like life changing for society, instead of maybe like what is this random piece of like revolutionary tech that'll be like a headline maybe for like 2 weeks in the New York Times, and then will become relevant in like the next couple of years as like the rest of the world catches up.
I'll add that like the comparison that I like to draw a lot for purely funsies reasons is like a lot of my friends are going to graduate school, and I'm very proud of them. And I think they're going to do amazing things. You know, come up with the next green energy technology or solar panels or whatever it may be. And they're going to transform the world as we know it. And I do believe that that kind of technology comes fundamentally from academic research, because industry research tends to be profit driven, and a lot of green technology just is not profitable. That being said, like someone needs to hold down fort while they do those things, and continuously optimizing what we have today is what industry does. So taking a cost saving measure here and reducing emissions over there, even if it's by like fractions of a percent or by single digit percentages, that's what industry is focused on doing right now. And it's unlikely that you're going to be doing that fundamental research that a lot of people are passionate about. And so at the end of the day, if what drives you is application-based things, I think industry is probably my recommendation for what you should test yourself in next.
All right, I'm going to redirect to some of the panelists who haven't spoken as much yet. So this will be for everyone, but we'll start off with Stephanie. What did you look for in the companies that you chose to interview for or apply for?
It's a great question, Michelle. Well, so after my sophomore year, I was really looking for location. I kind of wanted to like go back home to Madison for the summer and be there. So that time, that kind of just, I was able to look at the UW job board. Don't tell the U, but it's a little shameful. So yeah, I was kind of looking there and Handshake. But yeah, I guess a piece of advice from that is really don't be afraid to broaden your search. You never know what could come from any tool. And then I had known the company beforehand too. So like a lot of like reputation base is important too. If they're making a product you're passionate about, like ice cream, I could have been like sweeping the floors there and been like happy to like participate in what that company was doing. So I guess that was really important for me and what I looked for. And then I guess after junior year, my focus was more on like technical experience. So at Donaldson, like they do a lot of really cool filtration, like research and stuff. So I wanted to kind of be a part of that process. So I guess personally, in both my experiences, I looked at the company as a whole and what they were doing as a whole. Because once you're in there, it's so easy to move around. In my ice cream internship, it was a small company, so I got to talk to the line managers. I got to talk to the salespeople, the company owners on like a daily basis, and really got to like learn all these different roles. And then this summer, obviously, I didn't get to meet as many people in person because of COVID, but still, once you're in that company, I still got to, talk to the executives through panels and, learn a really broad array of things about that company and about the different positions at the company, because like they really most places will really want their interns to get that experience and learn as much as they can about the company.
I won't assign the order after this, so anyone can jump in.
Okay,
I do-
well, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I do have a question, but this is kind of a little bit off from what we're talking about. I've heard there's co-ops and there's internships, and I was wondering what the difference between the two are.
Sure. I mean, I guess as a former co-op, I can talk here for a little bit. So a co-op is like a cooperative educational opportunity. So can you hear me, or is there a lot of background noise?
I can
Is
hear
it
you pretty good.
Okay, awesome. So like the idea behind a co-op is it's a collaboration between your school and the company to educate you, the student, the co-op, and you'll get academic credit for it. So the U of M College of Science and Engineering has a really great co-op program. I think it's run through the mechanical engineering department, and you can work at a company for 2 or 3 semesters. So for example, for our major, it typically sets you back for graduation depending on how ahead you are in classes, but it is giving you a lot more time to work with the same company over an extended period as opposed to just a summer internship or a part-time internship during the school year, just because you have you have a lot of exposure to the people that you're working with, so you typically get like deeper and more like engaging projects, I'd say, compared to a summer internship. But obviously there's pros and cons.
Great, thank you.
Would any of the panelists like to speak on either why they chose the companies they went for or internships versus co-ops and all that? Otherwise, we can move on to another question. So it's up to y'all.
I can talk about why I chose the companies I work for. As I mentioned previously, this last summer I worked at HB Fuller in kind of a manufacturing capacity. And essentially, when I was looking for internships for that summer, all I was looking at was, is my job like to my standards somewhat like ethical in like I'm not producing anything that I would be unhappy producing, essentially. So for everyone, that line is like drawn in a different place, but that's what I was primarily looking at. And I also wanted to really get manufacturing experience because I thought I wanted to do that really traditional chemie manufacturing role. And then after summer doing that, I realized I hated it. And so for my co-op that I'm doing right now, essentially I was just looking for something completely different, essentially anything that wasn't manufacturing. And so that I found that through CPC, and that also kind of fulfilled my role of like doing something ethical and not really, not producing anything I would be unhappy with, or working in an industry that I personally find I don't really like or agree with.
I just really wanted to echo what you just said because I thought it was so important that you said it's important to find what you don't like as well. And internships are the perfect place for that because it's 3 months, you can bear almost any job for at least 3 months and at least take away that knowledge of what you don't know. So I just thought that was a very valuable point you added.
And I would also add that it's not just like the role, right? Like for Tejas, it was, manufacturing, but I think about like the type of company that you want to work for is also really important. So like I know people who did Exxon internships who were, like the big corporate atmosphere, but then changed to, startup afterward, because they wanted that kind of tight knit feeling. Um, and it's really about like does it work for you, and is this something that you're looking for? Like for me, like I looked for a company that was going to be large, that was going to be international, And I've looked for meaningful work that I could stand behind, and I felt like delivering, energy to places that didn't have it fit the bill. But there's a lot of people out there who would say that, like oil and gas is not something they would ever partake in, and that's completely okay. And so it's, are you comfortable ultimately, and are you proud to say to your next person that you talk to, like, I worked here, I contributed to this, because I think you shouldn't be anywhere that you're not happy to say that about.
Awesome. So we'll transition into how to make a good first impression. And I'm going to direct this at Brian.
Do you mean first impression more in like an interview scenario or like actually in your internship?
Like, let's say career fair. So like you're walking up to the recruiter. How do you make a first impression within that like 10-minute interval?
Okay, for the career fair, making a good first impression probably will come down to fundamentally, you have to dress nice and you probably want to have, actually, let me rephrase that. Not necessarily dress nice, but you have to understand why you're approaching that person, and that will fundamentally change how you should interact with them in that like not even, it's probably going to be like a 2-minute conversation you'll have with them. Because if you are like, like someone who's like me now, if I'm going to their career fair and I'm talking to someone because I'm going to want a job, my first impression is going to be much more structured around, I have like my full suit and tie on. I'm going to have like my really beautiful resume that I've slaved over. And it's a lot about being prepared to sell yourself really well, because I think a lot of people forget that when you're trying to make a good first impression, it's fundamentally about selling yourself, and if you're unprepared to do that, it will show. Because the big thing is they'll just be like, tell me a little about yourself, that god awful question that I don't think anyone has ever truthfully answered that well. They're going to ask you that at their career fair probably, because they're going to look at your resume, they're going to be like, give me a little splurge, and then they'll go through your resume. And that is where you make your first impression, and that's where you need to be really prepared to basically be like, oh, here are like my credentials, right? Like, I'm a junior, rising senior, I've taken these classes, like these are my passions, my focus, my extracurriculars. And fundamentally, when you're trying to make that good first impression at a place like a career fair where your only interaction is going to be maybe like a 2-minute conversation of who I am and what's on my resume, you just have to be prepared and know exactly like who you are and what is on your resume, because when they ask you a question, you need to know that answer right away, and you need to be able to speak it with confidence.
I'm gonna jump off and just mention that like I think it's less important like that you cover everything on your resume, and more important of the specific things that you do decide to cover from your resume, because it tells the interviewer that you have this limited amount of time to speak about yourself. What are the qualities that you value most, and what are the experiences that you take away most strongly? And so like have a full-time position lined up with General Mills, and I spoke about my mentorship. Like I took the time to say like I have these very brief like semester long mentorship experiences, and they mean a lot to me, and it's something that I continue to do. I will plug the AIChE mentorship program right now and say you all should sign up for it if you haven't. And they loved it. Like General Mills, in terms of their culture, is this place where they emphasize it, and so that's why we clicked. And so I think it's really important that like don't necessarily aim to cover everything on your resume, but do emphasize the things that either you think that they're going to kind of pinpoint it and say is really important, or B, that you personally find very meaningful to your personal development.
Yeah, adding on to what Jesse said, make it personal as much as possible, because, obviously at a career fair, people are seeing so many people a day. So if you're picking out those meaningful things, or and if you throw, like Brian said, if you throw out a passion or like something, well, you don't have to make a joke, but if you say like something funny or like something like your favorite ice cream flavor or something like unique about you that can make you stand out as much as possible, so it's not like the same conversation they've had over and over and over. You do, like, don't get me wrong, you do need to like get through your resume, and like they do need to know those things, but if you can add like a touch of personality to be remembered um, through things like your passions, that's always good.
I'm going to add on something maybe a tad bit unconventional, but ask questions. Like, I obviously give your little intro spiel, your 10-minute, or what did they call it, your elevator pitch, right? So that whole thing. But then after that, remember that it's still a conversation, and a conversation has to flow both ways. So like, ask them intelligent questions about their company that they would probably enjoy answering. And that will, I think, make you stand out.
I have a question regarding the interview experience within the career fairs. After talking with some more graduate students, some of them have mentioned that it's wise to ask people at the fairs if they can connect on LinkedIn in order to continue the conversation. Would you say, like from personal experiences, that that's a wise suggestion, or that it's not as necessary? I'll just say that I personally haven't done that, but I don't see a problem with that, especially for this career fair, for this year, since normally you might only have a 2-minute pitch, but now you have like an allotted 10-minute slot that you're having. So if you do get a little more personal in that conversation and have a good back and forth, I think that would make a lot more sense. And it never hurts to ask. The worst they can say is no or not right now. So I don't think that's bad advice at all. I just have never done that personally.
Yeah, I would say in the context of the career fair, like it's definitely something that will never hurt to ask. And if it succeeds, then it is like a great thing because that is like another person kind of in the back of your pocket that say like if a lot of things don't work out, it's like another person you can personally reach out to. But also for like the career fair, usually like if the person does like you enough to the point where I feel like it wouldn't be an awkward scenario if you were like, could we connect on LinkedIn? Usually then you'll get like a call within like the next day to like set up the next interview and like because I think for the past fall, yeah, because we didn't have a career fair this fall, like after like I would go and if it was like a good conversation with the recruiter at the career fair, like sometimes I would literally get the call like the next like once the career fair was over, like literally an hour after the career fair was over to like set up the actual like screening interview that was probably like 10 or 20 minutes long. So it's something that if it's the conversation and you feel good and you feel like you have made like a stronger kind of I don't want to say bond because that feels weird, but like if you have kind of made just like a better connection with the recruiter, then it's like never a bad thing to ask, but don't think of it as something that like I should be trying to like reach this point because then that might kind of feel a little forced and that's never good.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
I'll also throw in a fun tidbit that I recently learned about the human memory, and it's that it tends to be U-shaped, and so people tend to remember the people in the beginning, and the people that tend to remember people at the end. So if you have a time slot preference, I would highly recommend taking time slots either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, because you're more likely to be remembered that way. It's worked out pretty well for me. I'm gonna say that my earliest interview with the career fair was one that turned into a job. So I would highly recommend that method if you're looking to be more memorable, and if you're desperate to figure out how to make yourself stand out. That's utilize it.
I'm actually going to 100% second what Jesse said because that's also been very true in my experience. Because if I remember correctly, yeah, for my first internship, this past summer, that was the 2019 career fair. I think I was also probably one of the first people that recruiter had talked to, and I had gotten an interview essentially on the spot because of that. I think because he remembered me essentially. So yeah, I think I would definitely second what Jesse said.
That gives us a great transition into the next question, which will start with Nabir. How do you prepare for an interview, or do you have any tips for interviews in general?
Well, anytime you go into an interview, like the whole point is that the person's trying to get to know you. And obviously you want to know a bit about the company as well. You want to get to know a bit about the company through that interview. But you need to do your research, not just on the company itself, but do your research on yourself. That means you have to know your resume in and out. And the number one thing is thinking about what kind of questions your interviewer is going to want to know about you. Like, are they going to want to know the backstory behind like one specific line on your resume, or like when they ask you about a certain kind of skill, what stories can you tell about yourself to show that you have that kind of skill? And it's sort of preparing a list of things that you know about yourself that you can show to the interviewer, as well as connecting that to what you have already researched and learned about the company.
Yeah, kind of adding on to that, I feel like a lot of like especially when you get into like next year, when you take your intro courses, like when the career fair is coming up, the professors will talk a lot about like preparing about your interview in terms of like, I think what is it? It's like the STAR questions. Is that what it is? Yeah, like situation, task, something, something, where it's like, oh, they're gonna ask you a question and they want you to have like a very structured response of like, this is how I responded to it, and then like this is like what I did to resolve it, and like that. But I think like Nabir was saying, a really important thing though is also like researching the company and who you're talking to, because I like one of the biggest things too is that you want to end on a good note too, and you want to end with like a good impression during an interview. And the way that almost every single interview will end will be, do you have any questions for me? And a really good thing for there is just like think about certain questions you can ask. And it really is like there are questions you can ask that would kind of feel wrong, but they're like super valid questions. So like asking things about like workplace culture or stuff like, you know, like being able to like in terms of like vertical growth. So like like are there promotions? Like sure, this might not apply for like an internship hunt, but like asking questions about like what it's like to be at that company, which are like things you can't find online, right? Because you can always ask like, oh, like how much could I get in like a salary, or like what are certain other opportunities through the company? But asking things where it's like, what is it like to be at that company can like show to the interviewer that like, oh, you actually want to work at that company because you're like curious more about like how the company works internally.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump back in here and talk about, yeah, obviously it's great to have good questions about the company and questions for your interviewer at the end. And the best questions that you can ask your interviewer are the ones that you can only get answered by asking that particular person. Make sure they're really tailored to that person, because you don't want to ask them something that you could easily look up on the company's website. And I guess I'll tell you a little secret, but like what I like to learn about from companies from my interviewers is I like to ask them to describe the workplace culture in their team or in the company in 3 words. And that's really fun because it gets them engaged as well, and they have to think really hard about it as well. But it also lets me, as the interview candidate, know a little bit more about what are the most important qualities in that workplace.
Yeah, I'm also gonna second what Nabir said. One of my favorite questions is also kind of one that puts the interviewer on the spot, and that's what is your favorite thing about working at that company? And like it kind of fulfills that same purpose where like it really gets them thinking and gets them engaged in the whole process. And like an interview again is supposed to be like the name is an interview, but it's also kind of supposed to be like a conversation. So it is supposed to be still be 2 ways. And like honestly, the best interviews I've ever had, they've always talked more than I have, which is I don't know if that's true in anyone else's experience, but it's been true in my experience. So
I'll throw my favorite question in since it seems like that's what everyone's doing. But I, along the same lines, will ask what a favorite project someone's worked on is, because then, the interviewer and a lot of times like gets excited and kind of like goes into a tailspin, which is always like really interesting, exciting, to see if someone's passionate about what they're doing. And then you can get also a kind of good glimpse at what sorts of projects they work on at the company and how it kind of works.
Okay, so the next question is going to go to Jesse and then to the rest of the panel, but how much overlap is there between your classes and industry? Or like, do you ever actually use anything in your classes?
So I'm a little bit awkward to ask about this because I complained very bitterly to the department when I got back to for my first internship because I knew nothing that was relevant, and I really should have. But because of the way like a curriculum was structured, you don't get to like the theory of chemie until junior year, and I was in an internship like between my sophomore and junior year, and I didn't know like what a valve did, or like what's a or like what's the Jules Thompson effect, which like a lot of the sophomores are going to find out if they haven't already in thermo because they moved it up. Um, I would definitely say that like it doesn't do a whole lot for you. The classwork basically fuels your intuition, and so you might have a better idea, in 4 years than you did when you first started about, if you were to increase pressure on the distillation column, like what would happen? How do you get a better split fraction? Like you'll be able to instinctively answer those questions. But when it comes down to detailed design, like you're probably going to hit the books just like anybody else would. And the reality is like so many of those job roles are designed for like a combination between like mechies, EEs, and chemies that like no one's really expecting you to have a super clear idea of what you're doing unless you're going to like a very niche like chemi role. Like the role that I'm going into after my graduation is like I'm pretty sure there was an IE that went through it, and so like the IEs all take business classes. They don't take any of our chemi theory. So you can imagine that like there's going to be a lot of on-the-job training that's going to be relevant to the job. And so you don't really need to bring in any prior background, if that makes sense. I think it's useful to pay attention, obviously, because again, it builds that intuition, right? It'll give you a good starting place. But it's not necessary, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what the real world is going to be like. Because you could hate, I don't know, unit ops for the juniors, right? The junior on this call right now. But like working with machinery in real life is actually like a pretty decent time. And so it's not necessarily reflective. You can hate something in academia and still love it in industry. So just don't be too discouraged if you take thermo and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Like you will. Like once you start to apply it, you will.
Yeah, I feel like kind of adding on to that is all your classes will really do for you. I feel like your first couple of internships, it might be different for other people, but it was for me is that someone will like say a word or a concept and you'll at least know what they're saying. Like they'll be like, oh, like, they'll talk, oh God, I'm going to give a terrible example because I can't think, but they'll be like, this is a viscosity. And they're like, oh, I kind of know what that means. And then they're going to tell you to do something with it. And you're going to be like, I have no clue how to do that. But, like there are resources for everything. And honestly, like, the best thing that you will legitimately get from your classes that you can probably directly apply to industry is like learning how to learn. And people always talk about that, how it's a dumb thing, but like straight up, you could probably be the most impressive student coming out of like chemi, and you will enter industry and you will literally be just you're starting over basically, right? Because when you enter industry, when you're working on like a project, right, like your manager is going to be someone who's probably been in the industry for 20 years, right? Like the experience you get in classes and the experience you get while working are just fundamentally different, because sure, it might be the same information, but you're applying it in such different ways that it can never truly be applicable. So the only thing like that you're really going to get is you won't be confused at the first step of the problem, which is probably the most important part. It's just like you'll be confused everywhere else, but at the very least, you'll very vaguely know what you're doing. And then when, some upper management, like sales manager or, the boss asks you what you're doing, you can give them like a BS answer roughly, and you'll be able to keep your job basically. So, yeah.
Pro tip for those who are potentially going into their first internships or even going to like are experienced veterans going into their next internships. But the best piece of advice I ever got was on the second day of my first internship, and this gruff senior engineer comes up to me and goes, "You're taking notes, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, he just like flips to a clean page in my notebook and just says, "Write down everything you don't understand, and after the meeting, we'll go through it." And so like that's what I did for all of my following internships. Is every meeting I make a note of like all of the words and terms that I don't understand, and like it starts pretty big. And then like at the end of the day, I sit down with my supervisor, my manager, and I say, all right, I don't know what this means. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here. Is this important? Like big question mark, like what's going on? And then they'll actually like walk me through it and say like, this is what this is not important. And yes, you should know about this. And they'll actually like take you through it. And so don't be afraid to ask questions. The professors are going to make it seem like you should know things. And no one in industry is going to dock you and ding you for not knowing certain things. Like I sat in front of the senior technical engineer and didn't know the difference between a valve and a turbo expander. And like, he was like, do you not take thermodynamics? And I said, no, I had not taken thermodynamics yet. And he gave me a bunch of textbooks and said, go read and come back with questions. And so like, no one's going to like judge you harshly. And it's going to feel that way when you get through like unit ops, and people like the professors are not going to want to answer your questions. They're going to tell you that that's the way industry is, and it's not. So I'm a total disclaimer right now. Don't listen to anything the unit ops instructors tell you. It's false.
Well, I would just like to add that I did have to use a pH probe at one of my internships. So thankfully I took Gen Chem and made it through. So pay attention, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I would say OChem and polymer chem came in handy because of what I was working on. But yeah, this is just a footnote to everything everyone else has said. But OChem and polymer chem can be helpful if you're working in a company that is in a relevant industry.
Okay, the last question is going to go to Tejas first and then to everyone else. But for the panelists, what is your biggest singular takeaway or piece of advice that you want the audience to remember from this and from your experience in industry?
Well, thinking about it, I would say when you're looking at what kind of job you want to have in the future, what kind of role you want to be working in, whether it's in chemical engineering or not in chemical engineering, look at it kind of backwards. Like, look at kind of the life you want to live, essentially, and then work backwards and try to find a role that suits that lifestyle, essentially. Instead of trying to find like some kind of dream job that's going to satisfy essentially everything, look at the kind of life you want to live first and then work backwards and find a job that tries to suit that. So I guess that's like the biggest thing I've kind of learned over the last few months.
For me, I'd say the biggest thing I learned from my co-op and through the whole job search interview process is how important it is to work with people and to be able to work with people and develop those relationships at work. Because, you know, when you go into a company and you have your internship or you have your job, you're not working by yourself. Like, you're never working by yourself. It's always you learning from other people, and then other people learn from you, and then you have a whole network of people working together. So it's really important to make sure that you have good working relationships, but make it even more than that. Like, make sure the people you work with can really depend on you and trust you, and that you can do the same with them.
I would say try everything, figure out what you want to do. You have time. So, you know, if a job isn't, you don't think is like exactly what you want to do, or it's not a perfect fit for you, apply, interview, you know, if you get the job, try it out. You never know. Take a chance.
Yeah, for me, I feel like the biggest thing I would want people to kind of like understand and be more comfortable with is when it comes to like internships and stuff, like don't be afraid to ask questions at like literally every single step of the process, because in the end, these are programs that, unless it's like a terrible company that's predatory and just wants cheap labor, like these are processes that are meant for you to learn. And like it's okay for you to be like, oh, like I don't understand, I don't know. And then like honestly, because like you'll usually have like an end of internship like review or something with your manager, and like ask questions and be honest, because in the end, like if you can leave an internship being like those were the worst 3 months in my life, like that was still more valuable maybe than just sitting and like, you know, at just like an internship and like not necessarily learning, because the whole point is for you to learn about that industry and then to like guide if you want to be there or not, you know, after you graduate.
Okay, cool. Thank you to all of our panelists. If anyone in the audience has any last questions, you can feel free to ask. Otherwise, one last push, I'm putting the link for the Menti form for Chemi Mentorship in the chat. So that way you can get even more mentorship from potentially these people or other people who have experience in industry or research or just Chemi in general. At this point, you are free to leave. However, we are hoping to get a photo for our social media. So if you'd like to be in that, please stick around. And with that, we'll direct it to Ethan.
Do we want to do a countdown till on 3? I'll take the picture. All right.